Hey, amazing people. We know you guys love these stories, but most of you listening aren't subscribing. Our subs have been quite low this month, and we're really close to 20,000 subscribers, so please be a legend and smash the subscribe button. And like this video, it will really help support us. Thank you so much.
I was so excited when he finally asked me out. We had been chatting online for weeks, and he seemed so charming and funny. When he suggested a nice restaurant downtown, I readily agreed. I even took extra time getting ready, making sure I looked my best. As I walked into the restaurant, I spotted him right away, waiting at the hostess stand. He greeted me with a warm smile, and we were quickly seated at a cozy table in the corner. At first, everything was going well. We made easy conversation, laughing and sharing stories about our lives. I felt myself relaxing, realizing he was just as nice in person as he had been online. But as the meal went on, I started to notice a subtle change in his demeanor. He would reach across the table and casually rest his hand on mine, even when I subtly pulled away. Then he began draping his arm around the back of my chair, drawing me closer to him. I shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't seem to pick up on my discomfort. When the bill came, he insisted on paying, which I appreciated. But as we stood to leave, he placed his hand on the small of my back and ushered me out of the restaurant. The contact made me tense up, and I tried to politely pull away, but he held firm. In the dimly lit parking lot, he drew me in close, his arm wrapped tightly around my waist. I felt a growing sense of panic as I realized I was alone with him, far from any crowds or safety. I was thinking we could go back to my place for a nightcap, he said, his voice low and almost predatory. I instantly shook my head. No, I should really be getting home. It's getting late. His grip tightened, and his expression darkened. Oh, come on, the night's still young. I was hoping we could spend a little more time together. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to find the right words. I'm sorry, but I'm not comfortable with that. I think it's best if I just go home. He scoffed and rolled his eyes. You're overreacting. I'm just trying to spend more time with you. What's the big deal? I tried to pull away again, but his hold on me only grew stronger. Please let me go, I want to leave. Not until you calm down and stop being so damn dramatic, he snapped, his voice laced with irritation. In that moment, I felt a surge of fear. This man who I thought I knew was becoming increasingly aggressive and refusing to respect my boundaries. I was trapped, alone with him in the dark parking lot, with no easy means of escape. Panic began to set in as I realized I might be in real danger. I frantically searched my mind for a way out of this situation, all the while praying he wouldn't hurt me. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I looked him straight in the eye. I'm leaving. Now, I said, my voice quivering slightly. Let go of me. For a tense moment, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then, with a frustrated sigh, he finally released his grip. I quickly stepped back, putting as much distance between us as I could. Fine, whatever. Go then, he snapped, glaring at me. I was just trying to have a good time. If you're going to be such a jerk about it, then forget it. I didn't waste a second. I hurried to my car, fumbling with my keys as I fought back tears of relief and fear. As I drove away, I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see him following me. It wasn't until I was safely home, the door locked behind me, that I finally allowed myself to break down. I sat on my couch, shaking and crying, replaying the events of the evening in my mind. I had been so excited for this date, so hopeful that this man could be someone special. But instead, I had found myself in a terrifying situation, my trust and safety completely violated. In the days that followed, I went through a range of emotions: anger, shame, fear. I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't been able to get away. The whole experience left me feeling violated and deeply shaken. Even the thought of going on another date filled me with dread. It took time, but eventually the fear and anxiety began to subside. I knew I couldn't let this one horrible experience ruin my chances of finding a genuine connection with someone, but I also knew I would be far more cautious moving forward. The innocence and optimism I had felt at the start of the evening was gone, replaced by a deep weariness and distrust. That night will forever haunt me, a painful reminder of how quickly a promising situation can turn dangerous. I learned a hard lesson about the importance of trusting my instincts and not ignoring red flags, no matter how charming someone may seem. My safety and well-being have to come first no matter what. While I'm still healing from the trauma of that experience, I'm also grateful that I was able to get away unharmed. Not everyone is so lucky. My heart goes out to all those who have found themselves in similar or even worse situations. No one should ever have to feel unsafe or trapped, especially on what's meant to be a fun and exciting first date. The weeks that followed were filled with anxiety and constant looking over my shoulder. I replayed the events over and over, wondering if I could have done something differently to avoid that terrifying situation. At night, I had trouble sleeping as I lay awake wondering if he would try to find me or do the same thing to some other woman. I decided I needed to talk to someone and started seeing a therapist who specializes in helping victims of trauma and assault. She helped me start to process the turbulent emotions I was experiencing. Together, we worked on techniques to manage the anxiety and stop blaming myself for his actions. I came to understand that what happened was not my fault. He made the choice to act aggressively and violate my boundaries. With time, I began to feel more like myself again. I found myself able to laugh and relax without that knot of anxiety always in my stomach. I know there is still healing to be done, but I refuse to let one horrific experience steal my joy and optimism. I was so excited for my first date with Ryan. We had met a few weeks ago at a mutual friend's party and really hit it off. He was cute, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me better. When he asked me out, I immediately said yes. We made plans to meet at a popular Italian restaurant downtown that Saturday night. I spent all day Friday and most of Saturday getting ready, showering, shaving my legs, doing my hair and makeup. I must have tried on 6 different outfits before settling on a flirty but classy black dress and heels. I felt confident and couldn't wait to see him again. When I arrived at the restaurant, I told the hostess I was meeting someone. She led me to a table set for 4, where Ryan was already seated next to another couple. He smiled and waved me over cheerfully. "Hey, so glad you found it okay. This is my buddy John and his girlfriend Pam. I hope you don't mind that I brought them along too." I stood there stunned for a minute. He had turned our first date into a double date without even mentioning it. I tried not to let my disappointment show as I sat down across from him. "Oh, wow. No, I didn't realize you would have company tonight." Ryan laughed. "Yeah, I figured it would be fun to mix it up a bit. I told John all about you, and he was eager to meet you too." John and Pam already had drinks. Ryan flagged down the waiter and ordered a beer for himself and a glass of wine for me without asking what I wanted. The couple then dominated the conversation, chatting about people and inside jokes I wasn't aware of. I sat there quietly sipping my wine, increasingly uncomfortable. When I finally got a word in about how I thought it would just be the 2 of us tonight, Ryan brushed it off. "Oh, come on, lighten up. This is way better than just some boring one-on-one date." I was shocked at his dismissive response. Here I had spent so much time getting ready for a special first date with him, only to feel like an afterthought at this couple's outing. As the night wore on, I realized Ryan was far more interested in goofing around with John than getting to know me at all. At one point, when the 2 guys went outside for a smoke break, Pan leaned over with a knowing smile. "Sorry about this. Ryan has a habit of turning his dates into group outings. I told John it was a lame idea for your first time meeting him, but you know how guys are." When dinner was over, Ryan announced they were all heading to another bar down the street. I politely declined, making up an excuse about having to get up early the next day. The truth was I just wanted the awkward night to be over already. Ryan seemed surprised, but didn't try very hard to convince me to join them. "Oh, okay then. Well, hey, I had fun. We'll have to do this again soon." I just nodded, fuming a bit inside over the audacity of his comment, as if I would want to repeat this disastrous excuse for a first date. We said brief goodbyes on the sidewalk before they wandered off toward the bar without me. I drove home feeling frustrated and disappointed. I had been so excited at the start of the night, and it turned out absolutely nothing like I imagined. I couldn't believe Ryan thought inviting another couple I didn't even know was an appropriate idea for a first date. It showed a complete lack of consideration for me and what I wanted. Over the next few days, I thought a lot about whether I even wanted to see Ryan again after the way he had acted. When he eventually texted asking me out for a second date, I turned him down as politely as I could. I said that while he seemed like a nice guy, I didn't think we were really a match after all. He responded back telling me I was overreacting and needed to lighten up if I ever wanted to find a guy. I held my tongue from firing something back I would regret. Instead, I decided right then that I was done with him and this whole mess of a first date. I deleted his number from my phone and tried my best to put the whole experience behind me. Even though it hadn't gone at all like I hoped, at least it was over now. I had learned an important lesson about listening to my instincts and not wasting time on someone who didn't respect me. In the weeks after that disastrous first date, I found myself hesitant to put myself back out there again. The sting of rejection and disappointment hung around longer than I expected. I kept replaying the night over in my head, wondering if I should have been more assertive from the start, or if I had somehow given Ryan the impression I was okay with him hijacking our date night. My friends tried to boost my confidence back up with a girls' night out. Over cocktails, I told them the whole awkward story, and we laughed out what a tool this Ryan guy had turned out to be. They reminded me I had done nothing wrong. This was all on him for being so inconsiderate and dismissive. I knew they were right, but part of me still worried if I was the problem. I decided to take a break from dating for a while to focus on myself. I hit the gym more often, went to yoga classes, and made time for hobbies like reading and cooking that made me happy. Slowly but surely, my confidence began to return. Though that disastrous first date still stung a bit, it no longer controlled my self-worth. I realized it had just been an incompatible match, not a reflection of me. I still cringe when I think back to that ill-fated first date with Jeff. I'd met him through a mutual friend, and he seemed nice enough, so I agreed to go out with him. We met up at a cafe, which I thought would be a casual, low-pressure spot for a first meeting. I got there a few minutes early and grabbed a table while I waited for him to arrive. When Jeff walked in, he had a big smile on his face and seemed eager to chat. After we ordered some coffee, he launched right into conversation and started telling me all about himself. And that's when things took an uncomfortable turn. He started rambling on about his terrible financial problems, divulging details about his massive credit card debt that I really didn't need to know on a first date. I barely knew the guy, yet he was revealing extremely personal information as if we had been longtime confidants. As if that wasn't bad enough, Jeff then started telling me about his criminal history, admitting that he had spent time in jail when he was younger for drug possession charges. I was pretty shocked that he was being so forthright about his criminal past with someone he had just met. It felt like a real violation of social norms and boundaries. His oversharing was putting me in an awkward position. How was I supposed to react to such sensitive disclosures from a veritable stranger? To make matters even more uncomfortable, Jeff then shifted the conversation to his family and proceeded to badmouth his parents. He told me private information about family disputes, financial issues, and other drama that I had no business knowing. I was mortified listening to him air his dirty laundry so casually in the middle of a crowded cafe. The entire date became more and more excruciating as Jeff continued treating our first meeting like a personal therapy session. It seemed he had no filter and no sense of what sorts of topics were appropriate to discuss with someone new. I was really put off by his lack of discretion. As the date dragged on, I kept trying to change the subject to more neutral territory, but Jeff was determined to continue his bizarre confessional. I started racking my brain for an excuse to politely end this train wreck early. I thought about pretending I wasn't feeling well or that I had just gotten an urgent text from a family member needing help. But I didn't want to be rude, so I just kept smiling politely and nodding, letting him continue rambling while I slipped further into discomfort. After what felt like an eternity, Jeff finally said he had to get going. I tried not to look too obviously relieved. The whole experience had left me feeling uneasy and unsure of how to handle someone with absolutely no boundaries. After that night, Jeff texted me a few times asking for a second date, but I politely declined and made an excuse that I was too busy. I could not bring myself to see him again after the red flag-filled horror show that was our first date. The encounter gave me serious doubts about his judgment and social awareness if he thought divulging his deepest secrets to a complete stranger over coffee was appropriate behavior. I made sure to steer clear of Jeff after that off-putting incident. To this day, I remain cautious when I meet someone new, careful to keep conversations light until I get to know them better. I never again want to end up in such an awkward position, trapped listening to inappropriate oversharing from someone who clearly does not understand proper boundaries. That bizarre first date with Jeff will always stand out as one of the biggest disasters I've had to endure in my dating life. It taught me that taking things slowly and getting to know someone first is crucial. You just never know what kinds of unwelcome surprises a total stranger may reveal. Looking back, there were a few red flags that should have tipped me off before even agreeing to the date. Jeff seemed a little too eager when our mutual friend first told him about me. And when we texted to plan the details of our date, he started texting me constantly, sharing random minutiae about his day that would have been more appropriate several dates in, not before we had even met. I guess I was overly optimistic and gave Jeff the benefit of the doubt at first, but it quickly became apparent that he had no sense of boundaries or social graces. Some other warning signs were his tendency to dominate the conversation without letting me get a word in edgewise, and the way he kept dropping hints about all his emotional baggage within the first 10 minutes. My friends tried to make me feel better after that awful date by saying it made for a good story at least, and it did provide a funny anecdote as a cautionary tale when discussing disastrous first dates. We still joke about some of the absurdly personal details Jeff felt the need to share with me immediately upon meeting. But at the time, enduring that cringeworthy experience was deeply uncomfortable. I questioned my judgment and felt unsettled for several days afterward. It made me wary when starting to date someone new, not wanting to end up in another situation with someone who treated a first date like a therapy session for oversharing. On the night of our date, I dressed up in a little black dress and heels. I wanted to look perfect. We were meeting at a trendy new restaurant downtown that my friend Claire had recommended. She said it was all the rage lately with an eclectic menu and unique cocktails. I arrived early to scope out the scene. The hostess led me to a small two-top table near the back per my request. I preferred it to be a bit more intimate. The restaurant had a chic, modern vibe with brick walls, string lights, and candles on each table. Gary showed up right on time, looking just like his pictures, tall, handsome, and put together in a button-down shirt. We sat down and ordered a bottle of red wine. The conversation flowed smoothly at first as we covered the typical first date topics: jobs, family, pop culture. About halfway through dinner, I'd noticed Gary kept glancing around the restaurant distractedly. When I laughingly asked if he was looking for someone, he brushed it off, saying he thought he saw someone he knew. Soon after, an older woman approached our table, excitedly calling Gary's name. He immediately jumped up to give her a big hug. Taken aback, I sat there awkwardly until he made introductions. He revealed the woman was his mother, Helen. I was completely shocked that his mom would coincidentally show up at our first date. I tried to hide my discomfort as Helen gushed about what a lovely girl I was and how happy she was to meet me. She went on and on about how special her son was while Gary stood there smirking. It became obvious that he had planned this ambush meeting to gauge his mother's reaction to me. After a few agonizing minutes of small talk, Helen finally said her goodbyes and left. When she was gone, Gary sat back down and acted as if running into his mom had been a crazy random happenstance. I knew he had clearly orchestrated the entire thing intentionally without considering how uncomfortable it would make me feel. I was angry and offended that Gary would spring a meeting with his mother on me without any warning or discussion, especially on a first date. The rest of the dinner was awkward and miserable as Gary prattled on obliviously about work and his dog. I kept checking the time, ready to escape this disastrous date. Finally, the check came, and I quickly insisted that I suddenly wasn't feeling well and needed to leave. Gary feigned concern and asked if he should drive me home, but I declined and called an Uber. Outside, while waiting for my ride, I made it clear I didn't think there was any romantic connection between us and said goodbye. I had zero interest in seeing Gary again after the manipulative stunt he had pulled. Driving home, I just wanted to forget the entire uncomfortable night. Looking back, I was glad I recognized the red flags with Gary early on and trusted my instincts to get out of that confusing situation. When I got home, I quickly changed into pajamas and washed my face, wanting an emotional reset after the date from hell. Not long after, Gary texted saying he had an amazing time and couldn't wait to see me again. I tersely replied that clearly we weren't a match and wished him well before promptly blocking his number. The next morning, I awoke to several voicemails from Gary on my blocked number app. He pleaded for another chance and insisted his mother popping up had been a coincidence. I just deleted the messages, even more sure I made the right call ending it. Over the next few days, Gary continued trying to call and text from different numbers. To unwind and distress from the ordeal, I treated myself to a spa day. I decided this guy wasn't worth another second of my mental space. The following week, life finally started getting happily busy again. I reconnected with old friends, got absorbed in a new work project, and even had a fun date set up for that Friday with a guy from a different dating app. One night on my way to meet Claire for dinner, I thought I saw Gary's car pass me on the freeway. Shaken, I stared into the rearview mirror but saw nothing. At dinner, I was distracted and jumpy. I kept checking out the window for any suspicious vehicles. Claire noticed my nerves and asked what was up. After dinner, Claire walked me to my car even though I was just being paranoid. On the drive home, a car tailed me all the way back to my apartment complex. Safely inside, I shook with relief, realizing Gary had me on edge. While it was likely just paranoia about running into Gary again, I decided to file a restraining order against him just in case. I also took precautions like only parking in well-lit areas, heaping pepper spray on me, and having friends stay over. Gradually, with time, I started feeling safe again. The barricades came down, and I was able to relax and cautiously date new people once more. Despite the disastrous first date, the experience taught me to better listen to and trust my instincts. I realized I deserved someone who was considerate of my feelings, not manipulative. The encounter also gave me confidence that I could stand up for myself. A few months later, I ran into Gary at a coffee shop. My heart raced with anxiety until I remembered I had nothing to fear anymore. I held my head high as I ordered my coffee, ignoring his feeble attempt to engage me in conversation. I left feeling proud of who I was, regardless of what anyone else thought of me. Gary no longer had any power over me or my happiness. I was firmly in control of my life again thanks to trusting my gut. I was so excited for my date with Claire tonight. We had been chatting online for a couple weeks and really hit it off. She seemed funny, smart, and was gorgeous in her photos. I was thrilled when she agreed to meet up for dinner. I arrived at the restaurant right on time and asked for our table. The hostess led me back and I sat down to wait for Claire, smoothing my hair and straightening my shirt. I was a little nervous, but mostly just eager to meet her in person. After about 10 minutes, I saw a woman enter the restaurant who matched Claire's photos. She scanned the room and her eyes landed on me. As she approached, I stood to greet her. "Hi, are you Matt?" she asked. I confirmed I was, and we exchanged awkward hello hugs. Claire was just as pretty in person, with long brown hair and big green eyes. We sat down and started looking at the menus. Things were going fine at first. We ordered some wine and appetizers, and the conversation flowed pretty well. Claire told me about her job as a graphic designer and her hobby of photography. I found her easy to talk to and was really enjoying learning more about her. But then things started to take a turn. Out of nowhere, Claire started telling me about her last relationship, which had ended terribly. She went into extreme detail about all the lies, the cheating, the drama with her ex. I tried to change the subject, but she was fixated on rehashing every painful moment. Next, she moved on to the boyfriend before that, again unloading on all his flaws, the terrible way he treated her, and their nasty breakup. At this point, she was getting worked up, talking loudly with wild hand gestures. Our server kept shooting me worried glances. I gently suggested we talk about happier topics, but Claire barreled forward. She started venting about her family issues, health problems, financial struggles. It was an onslaught of negativity and oversharing. On what was supposed to be a fun first date, I felt like I was trapped in a therapy session, listening to her vent for hours. As the date dragged on, the horror continued. Claire started crying about a pet that had died years ago, seething with anger about a former friend who had betrayed her. She overshared intimate details about past relationships and family issues that I barely knew this woman, and she was dumping years of baggage on me. I was extremely uncomfortable, but didn't know how to extricate myself. People around us were staring. I tried to interject politely or guide the conversation elsewhere, but nothing could deter her. She was lost in her own world, recounting endless traumatic stories. When she excused herself to the restroom, I debated making a run for it, but I knew I couldn't just ditch her there. When she returned, looking distraught after reapplying her smeared mascara, I cautiously suggested we call it a night. Claire seemed surprised, not picking up on my discomfort at all. She responded by launching into another detailed story about an ex who had abandoned her on a first date years ago. I had to interrupt her to firmly say again that I thought we should end the evening. After an endless meal trapped at the table, we finally left the restaurant. Outside, Claire tried to make plans for another date. I gave a vague "I'll call you" as I edged away towards my car. There was no way I would willingly put myself through a second date of endlessly rehashed drama. I drove home bewildered by what had just happened. I knew first dates could be awkward, but I was not at all prepared for the onslaught of oversharing and emotional meltdowns I had just endured. It was supposed to be a fun first date, but instead turned into a nightmare of revisiting Claire's troubled past relationships and trauma. I couldn't wait to get home, change out of my date clothes, and try to erase the last few hours from my memory. Unfortunately for me, Claire did not pick up on my complete lack of interest after that disaster of an evening. She proceeded to call and text me incessantly for weeks, alternating between wanting to plan our next date and lamenting how I was already abandoning her like every other man. I had to eventually block her number, feeling guilty, but knowing there was no way I would subject myself to a repeat of that first date horror show. It was certainly a night I will never forget, though for all the wrong reasons. I wish I could say it was just a fluke bad date, but sadly it seems first date disasters are all too common. My friends try to reassure me that not every woman I meet will unleash years of baggage on me the first time we meet. Still, after an experience like that, it makes you wary about getting back out there. But I know I have to pick myself up and be willing to take a chance again. Here's hoping my next first date is the start of something great, not a therapy session from hell. At least I've got one heck of a first date horror story now. The date had started out well enough. Dina and I had matched on a dating app a few weeks ago, and we finally decided to meet up for dinner and drinks at a trendy little restaurant downtown. I'll admit I was a little nervous. First dates always make me feel that way. But Dina seemed friendly and charming from our initial conversations, and I found myself quickly relaxing and enjoying her company. As we ate our meal, the conversation flowed easily. Dina was genuinely interested in learning more about me, my job, my hobbies, my family. I, in turn, was captivated by her bubbly personality and the way she made me feel at ease. It was shaping up to be a really nice evening. About halfway through our dinner, Dina paused and eyed the cocktail menu thoughtfully. I didn't think much of it when she decided to order another drink. A glass of wine or a cocktail on a first date is pretty common after all. But as the night wore on, Dina continued ordering drink after drink. At first, it just seemed like she was loosening up and having a good time. But before long, her words started to slur and her voice grew increasingly loud, drawing the curious glances of the other diners around us. I felt my own uneasiness start to grow as I watched her become increasingly inebriated. When I gently suggested that she might want to slow down a bit, Dina reacted defensively, insisting that she was fine and telling me not to be so uptight. Her loud, slightly belligerent tone made me cringe, and I noticed a few of the other patrons turning to stare in our direction. As the evening progressed, Dina's behavior became increasingly erratic and disruptive. She started gesturing wildly as she spoke, nearly knocking over her drink at one point. At another point, she suddenly burst out laughing at something that, as far as I could tell, wasn't actually funny. I sat there, feeling increasingly uncomfortable and unsure of how to handle the situation. Eventually, Dina's antics drew the attention of the restaurant staff, who approached our table with concerned expressions. Before I could respond, Dina launched into a slurred tirade, accusing the staff of trying to ruin our evening. I cringed, sinking down in my seat as the other diners turned to stare. Desperately, I tried to apologize and de-escalate the situation, but Dina was having none of it. At that point, I knew I needed to get her out of there before things got any worse. Gently, I placed my hand on her arm, trying to guide her towards the exit, but Dina resisted, yanking her arm away and insisting that she was having fun and I was trying to ruin it. I sighed, feeling completely out of my depth. I knew I needed to get her home safely, but I had no idea how I was going to manage that in her current state. Reluctantly, I flagged down the server and asked for the check, hoping to make a quick exit before the situation escalated further. As we waited for the bill, Dina continued her drunken tirade, drawing more and more attention from the other diners. I shrunk down in my seat, my face burning with embarrassment. When the server finally returned with the check, I hastily paid and stood up, gently but firmly taking Dina by the arm. Carefully, I guided Dina out of the restaurant and hailed a rideshare. As the driver pulled away, I sank into the seat, my head in my hands. I couldn't believe this was happening. The date had started out so well, but now I was stuck trying to get a completely inebriated woman home safely, all while feeling utterly embarrassed and out of my depth. As the car made its way through the city streets, I couldn't help but wonder what on earth I had gotten myself into. This was not at all what I had envisioned for our first date, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread about the rest of the evening. All I wanted to do was get Dina home safely and then retreat to the comfort of my own place, far away from this disastrous situation. When the car finally pulled up to Dina's address, I let out a sigh of relief. The hardest part was over. I quickly paid the driver and then gently guided Dina out of the car, keeping a firm grip on her arm to ensure she didn't stumble and fall. Once we reached her front door, I helped her fumble with her keys, finally managing to get the door unlocked. With a gentle push, I ushered her inside, silently praying that she wouldn't cause any more of a scene. As I closed the door behind us, I turned and hurried back to the car, eager to put as much distance between myself and Dina as possible. As I settled into the back seat, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. The date may have been a complete disaster, but at least it was finally over. As the car pulled away, I closed my eyes, already dreading the inevitable questions from my friends and family about how the date went. I knew I'd have to come up with some kind of explanation, but for now, all I could think about was getting home and forgetting this whole experience ever happened. I was really looking forward to this first date. We had been chatting online for a few weeks and seemed to hit it off. I was excited to finally meet her in person and get to know her better. When she arrived at the restaurant, she looked just as beautiful as her pictures. I was immediately smitten. As we sat down, she immediately pulled out her phone and started scrolling through social media. I tried to make small talk, asking about her day and what she did for a living, but her attention was clearly divided. Every few minutes, she would pause our conversation to type out a text message or take a selfie of the two of us. I felt myself getting increasingly frustrated as the date went on. I wanted to connect with her to really learn about who she was as a person. But no matter how many times I asked her questions or tried to engage her, she always had one eye on her phone. It was like I was competing for her attention with a little glowing rectangle. When our food arrived, she barely looked up from her screen to take a few photos of the meal. She even asked me to take a picture of her holding her drink so she could post it on Instagram. I obliged, but couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. Shouldn't she be enjoying the actual date instead of documenting it for social media? As we ate, I tried to steer the conversation to more meaningful topics. Things like our hobbies, our family, our goals and dreams. But she seemed disinterested, hitting me short, distracted responses before shifting her focus back to her phone. I felt like I was talking to a brick wall. After about an hour, I finally mustered up the courage to say something. "Hey, I feel like you've been more interested in your phone than me this whole time. Is everything okay?" I tried to keep my tone light and non-confrontational. She immediately got defensive. "What? No, I'm just staying connected. I have a lot of followers and I need to keep them engaged. You're being too controlling." I was taken aback by her response. I wasn't trying to control her. I just wanted to have a real conversation without competing for her attention. But she seemed to see it as an attack on her social media habits. "I'm not trying to control you," I said. "I just want to get to know you better. It feels like your phone is more important than our date." "Well, maybe it is," she snapped. "My social media presence is a big part of my life. If you can't accept that, then we're probably not a good match." I sat there stunned. I couldn't believe how defensive and dismissive she was being. This was supposed to be a fun, casual first date, not a battle over her smartphone usage. The rest of the date was awkward and strained. She continued to intermittently glance down at her phone, typing away furiously. I felt like a third wheel to her digital life. By the time we said our goodbyes, I was relieved it was over. As I drove home, I couldn't help but feel disappointed. I had been so excited for this date, but it had turned into a disaster. I wondered why she had even agreed to meet up in person if she was just going to be glued to her phone the whole time. It felt like a waste of both of our time. I know that social media and technology can be a big part of people's lives these days, but there has to be a balance, especially on a first date. I want to feel that I had someone's full attention, not that I'm constantly vying for it. This experience has made me a little wary of future first dates. I just hope I don't end up in a similar situation again. The next day, I decided to shoot her a text, hoping to get some clarity on what had happened. "Hey, I wanted to apologize if I came across as too controlling last night. That wasn't my intent at all. I was just hoping we could have a more engaged, meaningful conversation. But I totally understand that social media is important to you, and I don't want to be dismissive of that. Maybe we could try going out again, and I could make more of an effort to be understanding of your online presence." Her response was not what I was hoping for. "I appreciate you apologizing, but I don't think we're a good match. It's clear you have some issues with how much time I spend on my phone, and I'm not willing to compromise on that. My social media following is a big part of who I am, and if you can't accept that, then this isn't going to work. I wish you the best, but I don't think we should see each other again." I stared at the message, feeling a mix of disappointment and frustration. I had tried to be understanding and make things right, but she had shut me down completely. I guess some people really are just addicted to their phones, even on a first date. As I put my phone down, I couldn't help but wonder if I was being too old-fashioned or out of touch. Maybe this is just how dating works these days, constantly competing for someone's attention against the allure of social media. But to me, it just feels wrong. I want a real, genuine connection, not a battle against a smartphone. I suppose I'll have to be more discerning about who I agree to go on dates with in the future. Clearly, this woman and I had very different priorities when it came to interpersonal connection. I'm not going to force someone to change, but I also don't want to constantly feel like I'm playing second fiddle to their digital life. For now, I think I'll take a break from dating apps and focus on my own hobbies and interests. At least then, I'll know I have my own undivided attention. Hopefully, one day I'll meet someone who values real human interaction as much as I do. Until then, I'll just keep swiping and hoping for the best. I was so excited for my date with Sam. We had met a few weeks ago at a friend's party and really hit it off. He was cute, charming, and seemed genuinely interested in me. We had been texting nonstop leading up to the date, and I really thought there could be potential for something real. The day of the date finally arrived. I spent hours getting ready, making sure my hair and makeup were perfect. I put on my favorite dress and a pair of heels to impress him. When Sam picked me up, he greeted me with a huge smile and told me I looked beautiful. Such a gentleman, I thought. He had made reservations at a trendy new restaurant downtown. I was thrilled. It was one of those places I had always wanted to try but could never quite justify the expensive menu prices. Over dinner, the conversation flowed easily. Sam was funny and engaging. He asked me thoughtful questions and seemed focused only on me, like I was the most fascinating person in the world. After we finished eating, the waiter came by with the check. Without hesitation, Sam said, "Oh, I forgot my wallet at home. Do you mind getting this one?" I was a bit surprised, but didn't think much of it. First date jitters, maybe. I was happy to cover the bill as it had been such an amazing night. We left the restaurant hand in hand, both all smiles. I thanked Sam for dinner and told him I'd had an incredible time. He suggested we go get drinks at a bar down the street. I agreed. I wasn't ready for this perfect date to end. Over the next week, I found myself replaying the night over and over. I was really starting to like Sam. So when he finally texted asking for a second date, I immediately said yes. During our conversation, I brought up him forgetting his wallet in a light-hearted, teasing way. But his reaction wasn't what I expected. He became defensive right away. "Come on, I thought you were more progressive than that. Don't tell me you actually think the guy should pay every time in this day and age." I tried explaining that I didn't mind covering the first date, but moving forward expected things to be more equal. This only made him angrier. "Equal. I took you out to a fancy dinner, bought you drinks afterward. That's not enough." He made it seem like me wanting him to contribute financially meant I was demanding he pay for everything. I tried to clarify that wasn't what I meant, but he just accused me of trying to take advantage of him. The more we talked, the more upset Sam became. He painted himself as the victim, like I was being completely unreasonable for wanting basic fairness and reciprocity moving forward. I realized then that he never intended to pay for a thing. This was his manipulative strategy: trick women into paying by pretending to forget his wallet, then gaslight them if they dare speak up. I was shocked and disgusted. This guy wasn't charming at all. He was a master manipulator. The entire perfect first date had been an act. I ended the conversation quickly, saying I didn't think we were a match after all. Sam blew up my phone after that, alternating between hurling insults at me and pleading for another chance. I stood firm and eventually blocked his number. I was proud of myself for recognizing the major red flags when his true colors came out. It was a hard lesson that people aren't always who they seem to be at first. Looking back, I'm thankful I only wasted one evening on him. It could have been much worse. I'm just sad my vision of a romantic first date turned into such a nightmare. But I won't let one bad experience stop me from getting back out there. Next time, hopefully I can spot the manipulative ones sooner before feelings get involved. I know there are still good guys worth giving a chance, and I'll definitely be splitting the bill from the first date moving forward. After taking some time for myself, I decided to get back into online dating. I was determined not to let my experience with Sam make me jaded or fearful, though I proceeded cautiously, not wanting to ignore red flags again. I went on a few first dates that didn't amount to much. Nice guys, but no real connection. I started to worry I'd never meet someone who gave me that same initial spark Sam did. But of course, that spark had turned out to be an illusion. Then I matched with Tyler on a dating app. His profile stood out as sincere, and he seemed genuinely interested in who I was as a person. We exchanged messages for about 2 weeks before meeting up. Tyler suggested dinner at a casual burger place. Low stakes and more affordable, a refreshing change from the pressure of an upscale, expensive restaurant. Over burgers and milkshakes, Tyler and I discovered we had tons in common. The conversation flowed naturally, and I felt comfortable being my authentic self around him. For the first time since my date with Sam, I let my guard down a little. When the check came, Tyler immediately said, "Want to split it?" I smiled, relieved at his considerate gesture. We each paid for our own meals and left the restaurant chuckling together at a funny joke Tyler had told. After dinner, we spontaneously decided to take a walk through a nearby park. Tyler held my hand as we strolled, admiring the city lights. When he dropped me off at home later that night, he gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. "I had a really great time," he said softly. I assured him I did too, that I couldn't wait to see him again soon. Tyler and I have been dating for a few months now. It's still early on, but feels less superficial and more real than it ever did with Sam. I'm taking things slowly, not wanting to ignore potential red flags again. But so far, Tyler continues to impress me with his kindness, respect, and maturity. My faith in finding a genuine connection has been restored. I know you can't judge a book by its cover or a person after one date. The way someone treats you over time reveals their heart. I'm not giving up on love. When it's the right person, it's worth being vulnerable. And I'll happily split the bill or take turns paying once they've earned my trust. It was supposed to be a fun first date at the local bar. We had matched on a dating app a few days prior, and the conversation had been going well, so I was excited to meet her in person. When I arrived, I spotted her sitting at a table near the back, sipping on a glass of red wine. She looked up and smiled as I approached, and we greeted each other warmly. I ordered a beer and joined her at the table. The initial small talk was a bit awkward, as first dates often are, but we quickly found our rhythm and the conversation started to flow naturally. We talked about our jobs, our hobbies, our families. I was genuinely enjoying getting to know her better. At one point, my eyes briefly glanced across the room as I noticed a group of people laughing loudly. It was a completely innocent and harmless action, just a quick scan of my surroundings. But as soon as I looked back at her, I could tell something was off. Her brow was furrowed and her lips were pressed tightly together. "Were you just checking out those other women over there?" she blurted out accusingly. I was taken aback by the sudden shift in her demeanor. "What? No, of course not. I was just looking around the room for a second," I explained calmly. "I saw you. You were totally ogling them," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch. I assured her that I had not been checking out anyone else, that I was simply glancing around the bar as one does, but she refused to believe me. Her agitation only seemed to grow with each of my attempts to reason with her. "I can't believe you would do that right in front of me on our first date. Are you some kind of player who's just looking to hook up with as many women as possible?" she spat. I sat there stunned, unsure of how to respond. This was supposed to be a fun, casual first date, and it had suddenly taken a very dark turn. Her suspicions were completely unfounded, but she was becoming increasingly unhinged, her paranoia spiraling out of control. "That's not what's happening at all. I'm just here to get to know you better," I said, trying to defuse the situation. But she was having none of it. She continued to accuse me of checking out other women, of flirting with bartender, of being unfaithful and disrespectful. Her voice grew louder and more shrill, drawing the attention of the other patrons around us. I felt mortified and utterly confused. Where was this coming from? I had done nothing to warrant this level of accusation and hostility. This was supposed to be a fun, lighthearted first date, and it had evolved into a public interrogation. As she ranted on, I sat there silently, unsure of what else to say. I didn't want to further antagonize her, but I also couldn't understand why she was reacting this way. Had I done something to give her the impression that I was unfaithful or untrustworthy? I racked my brain trying to pinpoint what could have possibly triggered this reaction, but I came up empty. Eventually, she abruptly stood up from the table, snatching her purse and glaring at me with contempt. "You know what? Out of here. I can't believe I wasted my time with someone like you." "You're just another lying, cheating scumbag," she spewed, her words dripping with venom. And with that, she stormed out of the bar, leaving me sitting there in utter disbelief. What the hell had just happened? I replayed the evening in my mind, trying to make sense of her irrational accusations and complete meltdown, but I couldn't come up with any reasonable explanation. I sat there for a few more minutes, nursing my beer and feeling utterly stunned. I had gone from having a pleasant first date to being publicly humiliated and accused of being some kind of womanizer. It was a complete and total whiplash, and I couldn't wrap my head around how quickly it had all unraveled. Eventually, I decided to cut my losses and head home. As I walked to my car, I couldn't help but wonder what I had done to deserve such a dramatic and nonsensical reaction. Had I somehow given off a wrong impression? Was there some subtle signal I had unknowingly sent that had triggered her intense suspicion and paranoia? I mulled it over all the way home, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't come up with a satisfactory answer. All I knew was that what should have been a fun, lighthearted first date had turned into a complete and total nightmare, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief that I wouldn't have to deal with that level of volatility and irrationality again. As I got ready for bed, I couldn't help but wonder if this was a sign of things to come. Would every future first date be fraught with this kind of drama and accusation? Was this just a glimpse into the kind of emotional turmoil I could expect from dating in the modern world? I shuddered at the thought. All I had wanted was a nice, normal first date, but instead, I had been blindsided by a complete and total meltdown, leaving me feeling shaken, embarrassed, and utterly confused. It was not the way I had envisioned the evening going, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread at the prospect of ever putting myself out there again. As I drifted off to sleep, the memory of her irrational outburst and the way she had stormed out, leaving me alone and humiliated, played over and over in my mind. It was not the kind of first date I had been hoping for, and it left me wondering if I had the emotional fortitude to ever subject myself to something like that again. The next morning, I woke up feeling drained and uneasy. I replayed the events of the previous night, still struggling to make sense of what had transpired. Had I done something to trigger her extreme reaction? Was there some subtle cue I had missed that had caused her to spiral into such a dramatic display of paranoia and hostility? I mulled it over, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't come up with a satisfactory explanation. All I knew was that what should have been a fun, lighthearted first date had turned into a complete and total nightmare, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread at the prospect of ever putting myself out there again. When Luke asked me to dinner, I gladly accepted. I took extra time getting ready, making sure my hair and makeup looked perfect. I chose a cute dress and heels, wanting to look my best for him. Luke picked me up right on time and greeted me with a warm hug. He looked just as attractive in person as in his photos. As we drove to the restaurant, we chatted comfortably about our jobs, families, and interests. At dinner, the conversation flowed easily. Luke was attentive and funny. He asked me thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. Over appetizers and entrees, I really felt like we were connecting. I found myself thinking he could be someone I could really see myself dating. After we finished eating, Luke suggested we get drinks at a bar down the street. I was having such a nice time that I readily agreed. The date was going so well. We sat at the bar with our drinks, and Luke told me more about his job and life. Then, out of nowhere, he said nonchalantly, "You should know I'm actually married, but Amanda and I are going through a rough patch right now." I practically choked on my wine. Married? There had been absolutely no indication of this until now. He hadn't mentioned a wife or any relationship trouble. I was completely blindsided. Luke went on casually, "I know I should have told you sooner, but it's really not a big deal. Amanda and I have been fighting a lot lately. I think we may be headed for a separation." I sat there in stunned silence, unable to formulate a response. How could he throw out this bombshell so casually, like it was no big deal? I felt betrayed and deceived. As Luke kept rationalizing his dishonesty, I grew more upset. He claimed he didn't think his marital status was worth bringing up until now. He said he didn't want to scare me off because he really liked me. But how could I ever trust someone who hid something so significant? He clearly had no respect for my boundaries. I felt sick imagining him going on dates and coming home to his wife, pretending everything was fine. Luke seemed oblivious to my anger and discomfort. He acted like his marriage was just a minor complication, insisting we could still date and see where things go. But how could I get involved with someone who was so deceptive right off the bat? I sat stewing in discomfort until I couldn't take it anymore. I quickly flagged down the bartender for our check, eager to get out of there. Luke looked surprised when I said I was ready to leave and asked him to take me home. On the ride back, Luke continued acting like everything was normal, suggesting we go out again soon. I stared out the window in stunned silence, unsure what to even say. When we got to my place, I hurried out of the car without even looking back at him. I felt shaky and nauseous as I walked up to my door. Once inside, I broke down in tears. The night had gone from a fun first date to a total nightmare. I felt so foolish for having trusted Luke. All his charm and attentiveness clearly meant nothing if he could lie to me like that. As I replayed the evening in my mind, giant red flags waved. Luke showed he had no integrity or respect for me as a person. Anyone who could justify that kind of deception had no place in my life. Though still upset, I also felt relieved I found out the truth about him right away. On just the first date, Luke revealed himself to be dishonest and untrustworthy. As uncomfortable as the revelation was, I was lucky to find out now rather than be strung along for weeks or months. Despite my initial excitement, I knew in my gut I could never see Luke again. Any potential relationship was doomed from the start with such a fundamental breach of trust. I had to listen to my instincts to protect myself. Though the night didn't go as I envisioned, it provided an important lesson. I would be more cautious moving forward and not ignore any red flags. I needed to date someone truly unattached who valued honesty. Once the initial shock wore off, I regained confidence that the right guy was out there. I just had to keep believing in myself. For now, I deleted Luke's number and resigned myself to some much-needed rest and self-care after this first date from hell. In the morning, I woke up still feeling residual anger and hurt over how Luke had deceived me. As I lay in bed replaying it all again, I had to keep reminding myself that this said much more about his character than mine. I did nothing to deserve being lied to like that. I decided to clear my head with a long morning workout session. As I ran on the treadmill, I thought about how I wanted to move forward. I knew I had to learn from this experience, but not let it make me jaded. Not all guys were like Luke. When the right man came along, I would know I could trust him.
I never imagined a simple swipe right could turn my life upside down. It all started innocently enough when I matched with Mia on a dating app. Her profile was captivating, smart, funny, and drop-dead gorgeous. We hit it off immediately, chatting for days before deciding to meet up at this trendy new restaurant downtown. I spent hours getting ready, overthinking every detail from my outfit to my cologne. As I drove to the restaurant, my stomach was in knots. I hadn't been on a first date in years, and the nerves were really kicking in. I arrived at the restaurant a few minutes early, pacing nervously outside. The place was buzzing with energy, crowds of stylish people flowing in and out. I checked my phone obsessively, wondering if Mia would actually show up. Just as I was about to give up hope, I spotted her approaching. My jaw nearly hit the floor. She looked even better in person. Long dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and she wore a form-fitting black dress that turned heads as she walked by. We greeted each other with an awkward hug, and I caught a whiff of her intoxicating perfume. My nerves melted away as she flashed me a dazzling smile. The hostess led us to a cozy booth near the back of the restaurant. The decor was sleek and modern, with dim lighting and candles on each table creating an intimate atmosphere. As we settled in, I couldn't help but notice how stunning Mia looked in the soft glow. Her makeup was flawless, and delicate gold jewelry adorned her wrists and neck. I felt a bit underdressed in my button-down and slacks. We perused the menu, which was full of exotic-sounding dishes I could barely pronounce. Mia seemed right at home, confidently ordering a fancy cocktail I'd never heard of. Not wanting to look clueless, I just asked for the same. As we waited for our drinks, the conversation flowed easily. Mia was just as witty and engaging as she'd been online, if not more so. We swapped stories about our jobs, hobbies, and embarrassing dating mishaps. I found myself laughing more than I had in months. When our elaborate cocktails arrived, garnished with flowers and served in copper mugs, I snapped a quick photo. Mia smiled approvingly and did the same, though I noticed she took several shots from different angles before setting her phone down. It was during a lull in conversation that I first noticed something odd. A couple at a nearby table kept glancing our way and whispering to each other. At first I thought I was just being paranoid, but then I saw the woman clearly take a photo of us with her phone. I brushed it off, figuring they had recognized Mia from her social media. But as the night went on, I noticed more and more people staring and taking pictures. Groups at the bar would look over at us and giggle. Even the waiter seemed to be hovering around our table more than necessary. I mentioned it to Mia, but she just laughed it off. She said she was used to getting attention when she went out because of her looks and online following. It made sense, given how gorgeous she was, but something still felt off about it. The constant stares and whispers were making me uncomfortable. I tried to focus on our conversation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something weird was going on. Our entrees arrived, providing a welcome distraction. The food was incredible. Artfully plated dishes that looked almost too pretty to eat. Mia insisted on taking photos of everything before we dug in. As we ate, she told me more about her job as a social media influencer. She had quite a following online and made her living through brand deals and sponsorships. It was fascinating to hear about, even if that world was totally foreign to me. I found myself both impressed and a little intimidated by her success. As the meal went on, I started to relax again. The wine was flowing, and Mia had me in stitches with her hilarious stories. I barely noticed the stares anymore, too caught up in our bubble of conversation. When dessert arrived, an elaborate chocolate creation, Mia insisted on feeding me a bite. It felt a bit cheesy, but I went along with it. As I took the bite, I heard what sounded like a suppressed cheer from a nearby table. Weird. I excused myself to use the restroom, grateful for a chance to collect my thoughts. On my way there, I overheard a couple at the bar whispering and giggling as I walked by. I distinctly heard one of them say, "That's the guy from the livestream." My stomach dropped. What livestream? I ducked into the bathroom, my mind racing. Was Mia secretly filming our date? Is that why everyone had been staring and taking pictures? I splashed some water on my face, trying to calm down. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe this was all just a big misunderstanding. I hurried back to our table, unsure of how to proceed. Should I confront Mia? What if I was just being paranoid? She greeted me with a warm smile, and for a moment I almost convinced myself I was imagining things. We finished up our meal, and I suggested we call it a night. Mia seemed a little disappointed but agreed. We said our goodbyes outside the restaurant with an awkward hug. As I walked to my car, I felt uneasy but couldn't put my finger on why. It wasn't until I got home that I discovered the horrifying truth. I opened up social media and was immediately bombarded with notifications. My phone was blowing up with messages from friends and even strangers. That's when I saw it. Our entire date had been live-streamed to thousands of people without my knowledge or consent. My heart raced as I scrolled through the comments. People were dissecting every aspect of our interaction, from what I was wearing to how I ate my food. Some were making crude jokes, others were sharing screenshots. My privacy had been completely violated. I stayed up all night, falling down a rabbit hole of research. I discovered this wasn't Mia's first time doing this. She'd been secretly filming her first dates for years, building up a massive online following in the process. She branded it as reality dating content, but it was all just a ploy for views and sponsorships. I felt sick to my stomach as I watched clips from our date, seeing myself from angles I never knew were being filmed. Mia had shared personal details about me that I told her in confidence. Now thousands of strangers knew intimate information about my life. The next few days were a nightmare. I was bombarded with messages on every social media platform. Some people were sympathetic, but many were cruel and mocking. I couldn't go anywhere without feeling like people were staring at me. Coworkers gave me strange looks and whispered behind my back. Friends teased me about it constantly. I even had a few people recognize me on the street. I became paranoid about going out in public. I tried reaching out to Mia, but she blocked me on everything. I considered taking legal action, but wasn't sure what my options were. I felt helpless and violated. The harassment continued for weeks. I had to make all my social media private and even changed my phone number. But the damage was done. A simple Google search of my name now brought up countless articles and videos about the guy from the viral first date livestream. I never imagined a simple dating app match could lead to such a wild and unsettling experience. It all began innocently enough when I swiped right on Lily's profile one lazy Sunday afternoon. Her pictures were captivating. She had long, wavy brown hair, bright green eyes, and a smile that lit up the screen. But it wasn't just her looks that drew me in. Her bio was clever and witty, mentioning her love for obscure 80s movies and terrible puns. We matched instantly, and within minutes, we were messaging back and forth. Over the next few days, our conversations flowed effortlessly. We discovered we had a lot in common: similar taste in music, a shared love of hiking, and the same offbeat sense of humor. Lily was quick-witted and charming, always ready with a clever comeback or a funny story. I found myself constantly checking my phone, eager to see if she'd replied. It had been a while since I clicked with someone so quickly, and I was riding high on that early dating excitement. After about a week of messaging, we decided to meet up in person. We agreed on drinks at a local bar called the Rusty Nail on Friday night. It was a place I'd been to a few times before. Casual, but with a good atmosphere, perfect for a first date. As Friday approached, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves building. I hadn't been on a date in months, and I really wanted this one to go well. On the night of the date, I spent an embarrassingly long time getting ready. I must have changed my shirt 3 times before settling on a blue button-down that my sister once told me brought out my eyes. I meticulously styled my hair, spritzed on some cologne, and gave myself a final once-over in the mirror. Satisfied with my appearance, I headed out, arriving at the bar about 10 minutes early. The Rusty Nail was busy for a Friday night, with a low hum of conversation and clinking glasses filling the air. I nabbed a small table near the back and texted Lily to let her know where I was sitting. As I waited, I couldn't help but feel a bit jittery. I ordered a beer to calm my nerves and tried to look casual as I scrolled through my phone. That's when I first noticed her, a woman sitting alone at the bar, maybe in her early 30s, with short blonde hair. She kept glancing in my direction, then quickly looking away when I caught her eye. At first, I didn't think much of it. But as the minutes ticked by, her behavior became more noticeable. She was full-on staring now, barely even trying to hide it. And she was typing furiously on her phone, her brow furrowed in concentration. I started to feel uneasy. Was she expecting to meet someone who looked like me? Had I accidentally stood someone up? I was considering going over to ask if everything was okay when Lily finally arrived, about 15 minutes late. My first thought was that she looked different from her photos. Not drastically so, but enough that I noticed. Her hair was shorter, cut in a bob that grazed her shoulders instead of the long waves in her profile pictures. She seemed a bit older too, with fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been visible online. I chalked it up to old pictures or good filters and tried not to let it bother me. Lily apologized for being late, blaming traffic, and we ordered drinks. As we started to chat, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The easy flow of our online conversations was missing. Lily seemed distracted, checking her phone frequently and glancing around the bar. Her laugh sounded forced, and she didn't seem to remember some of the things we'd talked about online. I tried to push aside my doubts and focus on getting to know her, but it was hard to ignore the growing sense of unease in my gut. And all the while, that blonde woman at the bar kept watching us, her eyes darting between me and her phone. About half an hour into our date, things took a sharp turn into the twilight zone. The bar door burst open with a bang, and a man stormed in looking like he was ready for a fight. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a closely cropped beard and eyes blazing with anger. He scanned the room quickly before locking eyes with me. My heart started racing as he marched towards our table. I had no idea who this guy was or what he wanted, but it was clear he was furious about something. Lily's face had gone pale, and she was shrinking back in her seat. The man reached our table and slammed his hands down, making our drinks rattle. "You've got a lot of nerve," he growled at me. "Did you think you wouldn't get caught?" I was completely bewildered. "I'm sorry, but I have no idea what you're talking about," I stammered. He let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, playing dumb now. You've been messaging my girlfriend for weeks, sending her pictures, making plans to meet up. And now I find you here on a date." My mind was reeling. I had never messaged this man's girlfriend. I didn't even know who he was. I looked to Lily for help, but she was staring at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. That's when it clicked. The blonde woman at the bar. She must be this guy's girlfriend. But why did she think I had been messaging her? The angry boyfriend pulled out his phone and thrust it in my face. On the screen was a dating app profile with my pictures, but under a different name. The bio was nothing like mine, boasting about being a successful lawyer and world traveler. Suddenly, all the pieces fell into place. The woman sitting across from me wasn't really Lily. She had stolen my photos and created a fake profile to catfish people online. And now, I was caught in the middle of her twisted game. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This whole date, this whole connection I thought I'd made, was a complete lie. I'd been tricked and manipulated, and now I was facing the consequences of my actions. The boyfriend was still yelling, attracting the attention of everyone in the bar. The real Lily, or whatever her name was trying to calm him down, insisting there had been a misunderstanding. But he was having none of it. The bartender, a burly guy with tattoo-covered arms, came over and told the boyfriend he needed to leave or he'd call the cops. For a moment, I thought the guy might take a swing at me. But after a tense standoff, he backed down. He stormed out of the bar, but not before fixing me with a look of pure hatred. The blonde woman scurried after him, shooting me an apologetic glance as she left. I turned to confront the woman who had pretended to be Lily, but she was already gathering her things. "I'm so sorry," she mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "I didn't think it would go this far. I was lonely, and your pictures were so nice, and—" I cut her off, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "What's wrong with you? Do you have any idea what you've done? You stole my identity. You could have ruined my life." She flinched at my words, tears welling up in her eyes. But I was too upset to feel any sympathy. Without another word, she rushed out of the bar, leaving me sitting there in shock. The other patrons were whispering and staring. I felt like I was in a fishbowl, my humiliation on display for everyone to see. I quickly paid the bill and got out of there, my head spinning. As I walked home, my phone started blowing up with notifications. Apparently, the angry boyfriend had posted about the incident on social media, tagging me and accusing me of being a cheater and a liar. Comments were pouring in, some from people I knew, expressing their disappointment in me. I never imagined a first date could turn into such a nightmare. It all began innocently enough when I matched with Laura on a popular dating app. Her profile picture immediately caught my eye. She was absolutely stunning, with long, dark hair cascading over her shoulders and a warm, inviting smile that seemed to light up the screen. We chatted for a few days, exchanging messages about our interests, careers, and what we were looking for in a partner. Laura was witty, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a week of pleasant conversation, we decided to meet up for coffee. As I walked into the quaint little cafe we'd chosen for our first meeting, I spotted Laura right away. She was even more beautiful in person, her eyes sparkling as she waved me over to her table. I felt a flutter of nerves in my stomach as I approached, but her easy smile put me at ease. We ordered our drinks and settled in to chat, and before I knew it, hours had passed. Laura was funny and engaging, laughing at my jokes and asking thoughtful questions about my life and passions. She told me about her job as a marketing executive, her love of hiking, and her dreams of traveling the world. Time seemed to fly by as we talked, and I found myself completely captivated by her. By the time we finished our coffee, I was utterly smitten. Laura was everything I'd been looking for in a partner: smart, beautiful, and seemingly down to earth. As we were saying our goodbyes, Laura suggested we have dinner at her place the following weekend. I eagerly accepted, already looking forward to seeing her again. The rest of the week dragged by as I counted down the days until our second date, replaying our conversations in my mind and imagining what it would be like to spend more time with her. When Saturday finally arrived, I showed up at Laura's house with a bottle of wine and butterflies in my stomach. She greeted me at the door with a warm hug, and I caught a whiff of her perfume, a light, floral scent that made my head spin. Laura ushered me inside, and I took in my surroundings. Her home was lovely, tastefully decorated with a cozy, inviting feel. Soft music played in the background, and the smell of something delicious wafted from the kitchen. Laura had prepared an impressive meal: a gourmet pasta dish with a side salad and freshly baked bread. We settled in to eat and chat, picking up right where we'd left off at the cafe. At first, everything was perfect. The food was exquisite, the conversation flowed easily, and I felt completely at ease with Laura. We talked about our families, our hobbies, and our hopes for the future. Laura was attentive and charming, laughing at my stories and sharing her own. As we finished our meal and moved on to dessert, a decadent chocolate mousse Laura had made from scratch, I couldn't help but think how lucky I was to have met someone so wonderful. After dinner, we moved to the living room to continue talking over glasses of wine. That's when I spotted some toys partially hidden under the coffee table, a few action figures and a coloring book. It struck me as odd, but I brushed it off. Maybe Laura babysat her niece and nephews often, I reasoned. Still, a nagging feeling started to grow in the pit of my stomach. Something about the situation felt off. As the night wore on, more details caught my attention. A kid's backpack by the front door, colorful artwork clearly done by children on the fridge, a high chair tucked away in the corner of the kitchen. With each new discovery, my unease grew. The pieces weren't adding up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Laura was hiding something significant from me. I tried to push my suspicions aside, focusing instead on our conversation and the connection we seemed to be building. Laura was as engaging as ever, asking about my dreams and sharing her own. She talked about wanting to settle down, to build a life with someone special. As she spoke, her eyes seemed to sparkle with excitement, and something else I couldn't quite place. After what felt like an eternity, Laura sighed deeply and looked up at me. The admission came slowly, hesitantly. The children in the photos were actually hers. She had 3 kids, 2 boys, ages 8 and 6, and a 4-year-old girl. My mind reeled as I tried to process this new information. Why would she lie about having children? It was such a fundamental part of her life, and we'd spent hours talking about our families. Before I could ask, Laura continued her confession, her words tumbling out in a rush. She explained that she was married, but her husband was terminally ill. The doctors had given him less than a year to live. Laura's voice cracked as she described the pain of watching her spouse slowly slip away, of trying to prepare her children for the inevitable loss of their father. She said she was devastated, but also practical. Laura knew she would need help raising her children once her husband passed away. That's why she had started dating, to find a replacement father for her kids and a new partner for herself. I sat there in stunned silence as Laura went on, her story becoming more surreal with each passing moment. She told me she had been on many first dates over the past few months, searching for the right man to step into her husband's shoes. When she met me, Laura said she knew right away that I was the one. She gushed about how perfect I would be as a father to her children and a partner to her, how she could already picture our life together. Laura seemed oblivious to how inappropriate and unsettling her behavior was. In her mind, she was simply being proactive about her family's future. But to me, it felt manipulative and deeply disturbing. As she continued talking about our future together, describing how she'd introduce me to her kids and how we'd all be one big happy family, I knew I needed to get out of there. I made up an excuse about feeling ill and needing to head home. Laura seemed disappointed but understanding. She walked me to the door, giving me a lingering hug and saying she couldn't wait for me to meet her children. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap in the face, bringing me back to reality. I practically ran to my car, my heart pounding in my chest. As I drove home, my mind raced with questions and doubts. How could I have missed so many red flags? Was Laura mentally unstable or just desperate? What if she tried to contact me again? The whole situation felt like a twisted psychological thriller, and I was the unsuspecting victim. When I got home, I immediately blocked Laura's number and unmatched with her on the dating app. I double-checked that my social media profiles were private and considered changing my jogging route, just in case. Part of me worried she might try to contact me again or even show up at my workplace. I spent a restless night tossing and turning, replaying the evening in my mind and imagining worst-case scenarios. Just when I thought the whole ordeal was behind me, I received an unsigned letter in the mail. Inside was a child's drawing, a crude crayon sketch of a family. There were 5 stick figures, a tall man, a woman, 2 boys, and a little girl. My blood ran cold as I realized what it meant. Somehow, Laura had found out where I lived. The implications were terrifying. I knew I couldn't ignore this. The next day, I went to the police station to file a report. The officer listened to my story with a mix of concern and skepticism. He told me they would look into it, but without any direct threats, there wasn't much they could do. I left feeling frustrated and vulnerable. I met Amy at my friend's party, and we instantly clicked. She was charming, witty, and had a smile that lit up the room. We talked for hours, discovering our shared interests in hiking, trying new restaurants, and binge-watching the latest Netflix series. Her laughter was infectious, and I found myself drawn to her easygoing nature and quick sense of humor. As the night wore on, the conversation flowed effortlessly, and I couldn't help but feel a growing attraction towards her. When she suggested we go on a proper date, I eagerly agreed, excited at the prospect of getting to know her better. The following week, I took her to a fancy Italian restaurant downtown. I wanted to impress her, and the candlelit ambience and soft music seemed perfect for a romantic evening. We were seated at a cozy table in the corner, and as we perused the menu, our hands brushed against each other's, sending a tingle up my spine. We ordered our meals, a classic spaghetti carbonara for me and a rich mushroom risotto for her, and continued our conversation from the party. Amy was just as engaging as I remembered, regaling me with stories of her adventures abroad and her passion for photography. I found myself getting lost in her eyes, mesmerized by the way they sparkled in the candlelight. However, as the night progressed, something began to feel off. Amy started making subtle references to my ex-girlfriend, Sarah. At first, it was just a passing comment about how Sarah and I used to frequent this same restaurant. I brushed it off, thinking maybe my ex had come up in conversation at the party. But then, Amy mentioned a specific dish that Sarah always ordered, and how I would always steal bites from her plate. I felt a chill run down my spine. I had never told Amy about that. As the evening wore on, the comments became more frequent and more specific. Amy would casually mention places Sarah and I used to go, inside jokes we used to share, and even the nicknames we had for each other. Each comment felt like a tiny jab, a reminder of a past I had tried to leave behind. I grew increasingly uncomfortable, my palms sweating and my heart racing. By the time we finished our dessert, a decadent tiramisu that we shared, I was ready to end the night. The nagging feeling that something wasn't right had grown into a full-blown sense of unease. I couldn't shake the idea that Amy knew far more about my past than she should. As we left the restaurant, Amy suggested we take a walk in the nearby park. I agreed, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind and help me make sense of the evening's events. We strolled along the path, the moonlight filtering through the trees and casting eerie shadows across the ground. The park was deserted at this hour, and our footsteps echoed in the stillness. Suddenly, Amy stopped and turned to face me. Her expression had changed, the warmth in her eyes replaced by something cold and calculating. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder, handing it to me with a smirk. With trembling hands, I opened the folder and felt my stomach drop. Inside were photos, emails, and texts detailing my past indiscretions and mistakes. There were pictures of me drunk at parties, emails I had sent to an old colleague complaining about my boss, and texts I had exchanged with an ex-girlfriend while I was still dating Sarah. Each piece of evidence was like a punch to the gut, a reminder of the things I thought I had left behind, buried deep in my past. I looked up at Amy, confusion and fear written all over my face. She explained everything in a calm, almost clinical tone. Sarah had hired her to destroy me, to make me pay for the way I had hurt her when we broke up. Amy was a professional, skilled in the art of seduction and manipulation. She had been paid to get close to me, to gain my trust, and then to expose my secrets in the most humiliating way possible. It had all been a game to her, a job she took pleasure in executing with ruthless efficiency. I felt sick as she listed off the dirt she had gathered on me. She had everything from drunken photos to old text messages I had sent in moments of weakness. She knew about the time I had cheated on a college exam, the lies I had told to get out of work, and the harsh words I had said about my friends behind their backs. She threatened to release it all unless I confessed my past mistakes publicly, ruining my reputation and my career. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. I couldn't believe this was happening. I had thought Amy was different, that we had a real connection. But it had all been a lie, a carefully crafted deception designed to destroy me. My heart raced as I realized the gravity of the situation. If those secrets got out, my life would be ruined. I would lose my job, my friends, and any chance at a future. As I stood there in the park, my world crumbling around me, Amy watched with a cold satisfaction. She had done her job well, and she knew it. She held all the power, and I was just a pawn in her twisted game. I pleaded with her, begging her not to go through with it. I promised to do anything, to pay any price, just to keep my secrets safe. But Amy was unmoved. She had no sympathy for me, no compassion for the desperation in my voice. She turned to leave, tossing a final comment over her shoulder about how I deserved everything that was coming to me. I watched her go, my heart shattered and my mind numb. I knew I had made mistakes in my past, but I never imagined they would come back to haunt me like this. As I walked home alone, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life would never be the same. The night had started with so much promise, but it had ended in betrayal and heartbreak. But as the weeks turned into months, nothing happened. Gradually, I began to relax, to hope that perhaps Amy had had a change of heart. Maybe she had realized the cruelty of her actions, the devastation she would cause. I started to rebuild my life, to pick up the pieces and move on. And then, one day, I received a package in the mail. With shaking hands, I opened it, already knowing what I would find inside. It was a single piece of paper, with a message scrawled in Amy's handwriting. "I'm not done with you yet," it read. "Watch your back." As I stared at those words, I felt a chill run through my body. I realized that Amy's game was far from over. She had only been toying with me, letting me believe I was safe before striking again. I knew that I would never be free from her, that she would always be there, lurking in the shadows, ready to destroy me at a moment's notice. I met Megan on a popular dating app, and after exchanging a few messages, we decided to meet up for our first date. I was both excited and nervous, as I hadn't been on a date in a while. We agreed to meet at a cozy Italian restaurant downtown, and I spent hours getting ready, wanting to make a good impression. When I arrived at the restaurant, Megan was already there, looking even more stunning than her profile pictures. She greeted me with a warm smile and a hug, and we sat down to order our meals. As we waited for our food, we started chatting about our lives, our interests, and our aspirations. Megan was engaging and easy to talk to, and I found myself getting lost in our conversation. She had a way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room, and I couldn't help but feel a strong connection with her. As the evening progressed, we decided to take a walk through the city, enjoying the warm night air and the bustling streets. We walked hand in hand, talking and laughing, and I felt a sense of contentment wash over me. It seemed like the perfect end to a perfect date. However, as we turned down a quieter side street, Megan suddenly stopped and pointed to a man sitting on the sidewalk. She told me that she recognized him, and that he was homeless and in need of help. I was a bit taken aback, as the man didn't look particularly homeless to me, but Megan insisted that we should do something to assist him. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. I didn't want to appear uncaring, but something about the situation made me feel uneasy. Megan, however, was adamant. She grabbed my hand and pulled me towards the man, urging me to take out my wallet and give him some money. As I reached into my pocket, the man suddenly jumped up, pulling out a knife and demanding that I hand over all my cash and valuables. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, as the realization of what was happening sank in. Megan, to my surprise, seemed just as shocked as I was. She let out a scream and started pleading with the man not to hurt us. I quickly fumbled with my wallet, handing over all the cash I had, along with my watch and phone. The man grabbed the items and took off running, disappearing into the darkness of the night. I stood there, shaking and trying to catch my breath, as Megan wrapped her arms around me, telling me that everything would be all right. We walked to the nearest police station, Megan holding my hand the entire way. She stayed with me as I filed a report, offering words of comfort and support. I was grateful for her presence, as I felt vulnerable and violated. After we finished at the station, Megan insisted on walking me home, making sure I was safe and settled before she left. When we reached my apartment, she came inside and helped me calm down, making me a cup of tea and sitting with me as I processed what had happened. I felt a deep sense of connection with her, and I was thankful that she had been there for me during such a traumatic experience. The next morning, however, I woke up to find that something was wrong. My spare phone and laptop were missing, along with some important documents containing my personal information. I tried to call Megan, but her phone went straight to voicemail. A sense of dread washed over me as I started to piece together what had happened. Megan, the woman I had trusted and confided in, had been working with the homeless man all along. While I was distracted and vulnerable, she had taken advantage of the situation, stealing my belongings and personal details. I felt a wave of emotions wash over me: betrayal, anger, and disbelief. How could someone I had connected with so deeply do something so cruel and calculated? I had let my guard down, allowing myself to be manipulated by someone who had seemed so genuine and caring. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks, and I felt a sense of despair wash over me. In the days that followed, I worked tirelessly to cancel my credit cards, change my passwords, and monitor my accounts for any suspicious activity. I reached out to the police again, updating them on the new information and providing them with a description of Megan. However, I knew that the chances of catching her were slim, as she had likely used a fake name and identity. As I tried to pick up the pieces of my life, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that followed me everywhere I went. I became more guarded and cautious, questioning everyone's motives and intentions. I found it hard to trust people, even those closest to me, and I started to withdraw from social situations. The experience had left a deep scar, one that I feared would never fully heal. Despite the pain and betrayal, I refused to let this experience define me. I knew that I had to find a way to move forward, to learn from what had happened, and to grow stronger because of it. I started seeing a therapist, working through my emotions, and learning coping strategies. I also reached out to friends and family, leaning on them for support and guidance. As time passed, I slowly started to heal. I realized that while I couldn't change what had happened, I could control how I responded to it. I started to focus on the positive aspects of my life, surrounding myself with people who I knew I could trust. I also started volunteering at a local shelter, helping those who had experienced similar traumas. I never imagined that a simple night out could turn into a nightmare that would consume my life for months to come. It all began when I met Chloe on a casual dating app. Her profile was intriguing, and her pictures showed a beautiful, vibrant young woman with a captivating smile. We started chatting, and there was an instant connection. She had a great sense of humor and a zest for life that was infectious. After a few days of messaging back and forth, we decided to meet up at a popular club downtown for a night of dancing and getting to know each other better. The evening started off wonderfully. I'd arrived at the club a few minutes early, my heart racing with anticipation. When Chloe walked in, she took my breath away. She looked even more stunning in person, wearing a form-fitting dress that hugged her curves in all the right places. We greeted each other with a warm hug, and I could feel the chemistry between us. We grabbed a couple of drinks from the bar and found a cozy booth to sit and chat. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and we discovered that we had a lot in common. We both loved traveling, trying new restaurants, and spending time outdoors. As the night wore on, we danced and laughed, the alcohol and the music creating a heady atmosphere of excitement and possibility. As the club began to wind down, Chloe leaned in close and suggested that we head back to my place to continue the evening in a more intimate setting. I hesitated for a moment, not wanting to rush things, but the look in her eyes and the electricity between us was too powerful to resist. We caught a cab and made our way to my apartment, our hands intertwined and our bodies pressing close together in the backseat. Once we arrived at my place, things quickly escalated. We poured a couple more drinks and put on some music, the tension between us building with every passing minute. Chloe kicked off her heels and pulled me close, her lips finding mine in a deep, passionate kiss. We stumbled towards the bedroom, our hands exploring each other's bodies, our breathing heavy with desire. And then, without warning, everything changed. Midway through our passionate encounter, Chloe suddenly went limp in my arms. At first, I thought she was just caught up in the moment, but as I called her name and tried to rouse her, I realized that something was terribly wrong. Her skin was pale and clammy, and her breathing was shallow. Panic rising in my chest, I quickly checked for a pulse and found it weak and thready. With shaking hands, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. As I waited for the ambulance to arrive, I cradled Chloe's head in my lap, stroking her hair and whispering words of comfort, even though I knew she couldn't hear me. The minutes seemed to stretch on forever, each second feeling like an eternity. When the paramedics finally arrived, They burst into the room with a sense of urgency, their faces grim and focused. They quickly assessed Chloe's condition and began working on her, attaching monitoring equipment and starting an IV. As they worked, they peppered me with questions about what had happened, what we had been doing, and if we had taken any drugs. I answered as best I could, my voice shaking with fear and confusion. I told them that we hadn't taken anything, that we had just been drinking and enjoying each other's company. But as they loaded Chloe onto a stretcher and rushed her out of the apartment, I could see the suspicion in their eyes. They had found something in her system, something that I couldn't explain. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks, and I felt like I was going to be sick. How could this be happening? How could a night that had started out so perfectly have gone so horribly wrong? The next few hours were a blur of flashing lights, frantic phone calls, and endless questions from the police. I tried to explain my side of the story, to make them understand that I would never, ever do anything to hurt Chloe. But the evidence seemed to be stacked against me, and I could see the doubt in their eyes. As the sun rose on a new day, I found myself sitting in a cold, sterile interrogation room, my head in my hands and my heart heavy with dread. The detective across from me looked at me with a mixture of pity and revulsion, as if he had already decided that I was guilty. He slid a piece of paper across the table, his voice low and serious. "Chloe is pressing charges," he said, his words hitting me like a physical blow. "She says that you spiked her drink, that you took advantage of her while she was unconscious. We found traces of a drug in her system, and your apartment was the last place she remembers being. What do you have to say for yourself?" I stared at him in disbelief, my mind reeling. How could Chloe think that I would do something like that? How could she accuse me of such a heinous crime? I opened my mouth to defend myself, to tell him that it was all a terrible misunderstanding, but the words wouldn't come. I felt like I was drowning, like the walls were closing in on me. I spent my days poring over every detail of that fateful night, trying to make sense of what had happened. I replayed every moment in my mind, looking for any clue or inconsistency that might prove my innocence. But the more I thought about it, the more confused and frustrated I became. It was like trying to put together a puzzle with missing pieces, and the picture that was emerging was one that I didn't recognize. As the trial approached, I felt like I was living in a waking nightmare. The prosecutor painted me as a predator, a monster who had preyed on an innocent young woman. Chloe took the stand, her voice shaking with emotion as she recounted her version of events. She spoke of feeling dizzy and disoriented, of waking up in a strange place with no memory of how she had gotten there. She spoke of the fear and the shame that had consumed her in the days and weeks that followed, of the way that her life had been torn apart by the actions of a man she had trusted. I listened to her testimony in a state of numb disbelief, my heart breaking with every word. I wanted to scream, to shake her and make her see the truth, but I knew that it was too late. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. In the end, the jury found me not guilty, citing a lack of concrete evidence and inconsistencies in Chloe's testimony. But the verdict brought me no relief, no sense of vindication. The experience had changed me in ways that I could never fully articulate, had left scars that would never fully heal. I never expected my first date with Selena to take such a dark turn. When I first came across her profile on that dating app, she seemed like a fun, easygoing girl. Her photos showed off a warm smile and a sparkle in her eyes that drew me in instantly. We started chatting, and the conversation flowed so effortlessly. I couldn't help but suggest we meet up for drinks. Selena eagerly agreed, and I found myself counting down the days until our date with a mix of excitement and nerves. The night of our date arrived, and I couldn't have been more thrilled. I walked into the dimly lit bar, scanning the crowd until I spotted Selena. She looked even more stunning in person, her long dark hair cascading over her shoulders, her red dress hugging her curves in all the right places. As I approached her, she greeted me with a dazzling smile and a warm hug that lingered just a moment too long. The tension between us was palpable from the start. We settled into a cozy booth, and the conversation took off like we were old friends catching up. Selena had a way of making me feel at ease, her laughter infectious, her wit sharp. We traded stories and jokes over rounds of drinks, the alcohol loosening our inhibitions. I found myself getting lost in her captivating green eyes, hanging on to her every word. It felt like we were the only two people in the room. As the night wore on and the drinks kept flowing, Selena's demeanor started to shift. Her playful smirk took on a mischievous edge, and she leaned in close, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She suggested we play a game, a twist on truth or dare, but with only truths. We'd take turns revealing our deepest, darkest secrets, each one more shocking than the last. I hesitated for a moment, but the thrill of the unknown and the heat of Selena's gaze won me over. I agreed, my heart racing with anticipation. At first, the secrets were relatively tame. Embarrassing childhood memories, hidden talents, guilty pleasures. But with each round, Selena pushed the boundaries further. Her confessions grew more personal, more intimate. She revealed past relationships gone wrong, risky encounters, illegal indulgences. I matched her every step of the way, determined not to back down from the challenge. The air between us crackled with a dangerous electricity. Then, Selena dropped the bombshell that changed everything. With a wicked glint in her eyes, she leaned in close, her lips brushing against my ear as she whispered her deepest secret yet. She confessed to having tasted human flesh before, just to see if she could get away with it. A chill ran down my spine as her words sank in. I pulled back, searching her face for any sign that she was joking, but Selena's expression remained inscrutable. She let out a low, throaty chuckle, assuring me it was all part of the game, but something in her tone sent warning bells ringing in my head. I tried to play it cool, forcing a laugh and taking a long swig of my drink to buy myself time. But my mind was reeling. Selena's confession had shattered the illusion of the fun, flirty girl I thought I'd been getting to know. Suddenly, every interaction took on a sinister undertone. Her touches, once enticing, now made my skin crawl. Her laughter, once warm, now sounded hollow and unsettling. I couldn't shake the image of those piercing green eyes boring into me, hiding untold depths of darkness. The rest of the date passed in a surreal blur. I went through the motions, trying to keep up with Selena's banter, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this girl as possible. When the check finally came, I fumbled with my wallet, my hands shaking as I tossed down some bills. Selena watched me with an amused smirk, like she could sense my unease and reveled in it. We said our goodbyes outside the bar, Selena pulling me in for a hug that felt more like a vice grip. She purred in my ear, suggesting we do this again sometime, but I couldn't muster more than a non-committal mumble in response. As I watched her saunter away into the night, her hips swaying hypnotically, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I practically sprinted to my car, my heart pounding in my chest. Sitting behind the wheel, I finally allowed myself to breathe. But even as I drove away, putting as much distance between myself and Selena as possible, I couldn't shake the lingering unease. Her words echoed in my mind, that chilling confession playing on a loop. I found myself questioning everything about our encounter. Had it really been just a game to her? Or was there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? In the days that followed, I couldn't bring myself to respond to Selena's texts or calls. Every notification sent a fresh jolt of fear through my veins. I knew I was probably overreacting, letting my imagination run wild, but I couldn't take the risk. Something about that night, about Selena herself, had shaken me to my core. Even now, months later, I still catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see Selena's haunting green eyes watching me from the shadows. I can't shake the feeling that I dodged a bullet that night, that I caught a glimpse of something truly dangerous lurking beneath her captivating facade. I've tried to move on, to chalk it up to a bizarre, unsettling experience and leave it in the past. But sometimes, in the dead of night, my mind drifts back to that fateful date. I find myself wondering what would have happened if I'd stayed, if I'd let myself get drawn deeper into Selena's twisted world. And I can't help but shudder at the thought of how close I came to finding out the hard way just how far she was willing to go. So now I'm left with a chilling secret of my own. A story I can never quite bring myself to share, for fear of being met with disbelief or judgment. But it's a reminder to trust my instincts, to never ignore that little voice in the back of my head warning me of danger. Because you never know what darkness might be lurking behind a pretty face and a charming smile. I was brimming with excitement for my first date with Victoria, an elegant and sophisticated woman I had met on an exclusive dating app. Her profile depicted a life of wealth and luxury, and her witty charm in our messages indicated a personality that was just as captivating. I couldn't believe my luck when she agreed to meet me for dinner at Le Bernardin, one of the most upscale French restaurants in New York City. We met at the bar for cocktails before our table was ready. Victoria looked just as stunning as her photos, dressed impeccably in a form-fitting black dress and designer heels. Our conversation flowed easily over drinks, touching on travel, careers, hobbies. Victoria was well-versed and engaging on any topic. I was thoroughly charmed by her intelligence and poise. A nagging voice in the back of my mind told me she seemed too perfect, but I was too enthralled to care. We were escorted to our intimate table in a secluded corner of the dining room. Victoria insisted we try the chef's seasonal tasting menu with wine pairings. As we dined on decadent courses like duck foie gras and Mongolian Wagyu beef, I realized I knew very little about this intriguing woman across from me. When I politely asked about her family or background, she tactfully changed the subject or gave vague responses. As dessert arrived, her demeanor subtly shifted. She leaned in close, an ominous glint in her eye, and made a startling proposition. She wanted me to be her accomplice in an upcoming crime caper. I was stunned, certain I had misheard. But Victoria's expression was dead serious as she explained she was part of an underground society of elite criminals, whose initiation required successfully executing illegal acts. She had chosen me as her partner for the next mission. I fumbled over my words, utterly confused by this sudden twisted turn. I tried to defuse the situation with awkward laughter, but Victoria did not crack a smile. She coolly elaborated that she had already put me in a compromising position, having fabricated extensive evidence over the last few weeks, photos, videos, online conversations, that implicated me as a willing criminal conspirator. My head was spinning, her thinly veiled threats sinking in. If I did not comply with her demands, she assured me this false proof would convince any jury of my guilt. Panic washed over me as I realized I had no way to disprove her claims. I pleaded with her to reconsider this madness, insisting I had no desire to engage in criminal acts. But she was unmoved, stating this night had never been about romance, but rather recruitment. The restaurant suddenly felt claustrophobic, the dim lighting menacing. I had to get out of there. I hastily signed the check while corralling my rattled nerves. Victoria watched me with an eerie smile, amused by my visible anxiety. As we exited, she handed me a business card embossed with only an address and date 1 week away. She instructed me to meet her there, if I wanted to safeguard my future. Her tone left no room for argument. I hurriedly flagged down a taxi, glancing back to see Victoria's tall figure watching me impassively under the restaurant awning before disappearing into the night. I spent the cab ride home in a daze, waves of shock and disbelief crashing over me. The following days passed in a fog. I agonized over what to do, but could see no clear solution. Without proof of Victoria's threats, the police would dismiss me as paranoid. And if I refused to meet her demands, she seemed unhinged enough to ruin my life out of spite. Each passing day heightened my anxiety as her deadline loomed. In a moment of desperation, I unloaded the whole sordid tale to my older sister Julia, who had always been my voice of reason. Her protective instincts kicked into high gear. She asked if I had any hard evidence of Victoria's blackmail. I shook my head despondently, but then remembered I had recorded our dinner conversation on my phone out of habit. Julia's eyes lit up triumphantly. This was the proof we needed to turn the tables on Victoria. We immediately went to the authorities armed with the recording. With this concrete evidence, the police were able to open an investigation, working quickly to uncover Victoria's true identity as a wanted criminal. Her threats against me had been a hollow means of manipulation, but she had unwittingly exposed more about herself than intended. The investigation remains ongoing, but Victoria is now in custody, her power to upend my life neutralized. I emerged rattled but relieved that I had not caved to her schemes. Julia was right that the truth would protect me under pressure. This harrowing experience has taught me to listen to my instincts. If something seems too good to be true, it likely is. While first dates are meant to be exciting, real connection stems from honesty. I am thankful I can now look to the future with the darkness of that night fully behind me. I never thought I'd be caught up in something like this. It all started innocently enough when I matched with Sarah on a dating app. Her profile caught my eye immediately. She had a warm smile and bright eyes that seemed to sparkle even in the photos. We hit it off right away, messaging back and forth for a few days before deciding to meet up for coffee. Our conversations were light and fun, full of witty banter and shared interests. I found myself looking forward to her messages, eager to learn more about her. As the day of our date approached, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. I spent more time than usual getting ready, wanting to make a good impression. I chose a nice but casual outfit, not wanting to seem like I was trying too hard. On my way to the cafe, I picked up a small bunch of flowers, nothing too extravagant, just a friendly gesture. I walked into the cafe, scanning the room for Sarah. She was already there, sitting at a small table by the window. She looked even prettier than her profile pictures, her hair catching the sunlight in a way that made it glow. As I approached, she looked up and smiled, and I felt my nerves melt away. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories. The conversation flowed easily, jumping from topic to topic without any awkward pauses. We discovered we had similar tastes in music and books, and Sarah had a way of making even mundane topics sound fascinating. I found myself completely captivated by her. After coffee, neither of us wanted the date to end. We decided to grab dinner at a nearby Italian restaurant. Over pasta and wine, we continued getting to know each other. Sarah was smart and articulate, sharing insights about her work as a graphic designer that made me see the world in a new way. She seemed genuinely interested in my job, too, asking thoughtful questions about my projects and career goals. As we talked, I found myself thinking this could be the start of something special. There was an ease between us that I hadn't experienced on a first date before. As the night went on, I didn't want it to end. After dinner, we took a walk through a nearby park, enjoying the warm evening air. The park was beautifully lit, with fairy lights strung through the trees. It felt almost magical. We strolled slowly, our hands occasionally brushing against each other. When it was time to say goodbye, we lingered for a moment. Then, almost naturally, we leaned in for a kiss. It was sweet and brief, nothing inappropriate or forceful, just a nice end to a great first date. As we parted ways, Sarah smiled and said she'd had a wonderful time. We made tentative plans to meet up again later in the week. I went home feeling on top of the world. I couldn't stop smiling as I replayed the evening in my mind. Sarah had seemed just as into me as I was into her. I fell asleep that night feeling optimistic about where this might lead. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Sarah. At first, I was excited to hear from her so soon. My heart raced a little as I opened the message, expecting something sweet or flirty. But as I read the words on the screen, my heart sank and my stomach churned. I had to read it several times before the meaning sank in. Sarah was accusing me of forcing myself on her during our date. She claimed I'd gotten her drunk and taken advantage of her. None of it was true. We'd each had one glass of wine with dinner, and our goodnight kiss had been completely consensual. I felt like I was in some kind of bizarre nightmare. How could she say these things? It was like she was describing a completely different evening than the one we'd shared. Before I could even formulate a response, another message came through. This one made my blood run cold. Sarah said she had pictures and videos that proved her story. She threatened to go to the police unless I gave her money. My mind raced, trying to remember if I'd seen her taking any photos or videos during our date. I couldn't recall anything, but then again, I'd been so caught up in our conversation that I might not have noticed. I felt sick to my stomach. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, but her accusations were terrifying. Even if I could prove my innocence, just being accused of something like that could ruin my life. I could lose my job, my friends, everything. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands shaking as I held my phone, trying to figure out what to do. As the day went on, more messages came in. Sarah had clearly planned this out carefully. She knew details about my life and job that she must have researched beforehand. She mentioned mutual acquaintances, implying she could easily spread her story to people we both knew. It was like she had constructed an elaborate web around me, and I was trapped in the middle of it. I didn't know what to do. I thought about going to the police myself, but I was scared they might believe Sarah over me. I considered telling my friends or family, but I was too ashamed and worried they might doubt me. The more I thought about it, the more trapped I felt. Sarah seemed to have thought of everything. She'd set up the perfect date, making sure we were seen in public places. She'd probably taken innocent photos or videos that could be doctored or taken out of context. I spent the next few days in a fog of anxiety and fear. I couldn't eat or sleep. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, worried it was another threatening message from Sarah. I started avoiding my friends and family, scared that Sarah might have already reached out to them with her false story. I felt completely alone, unsure of who I could trust or turn to for help. As the pressure from Sarah increased, I started to consider giving in to her demands. Maybe if I just paid her off, she'd leave me alone and I could move on with my life. But deep down, I knew that probably wouldn't be the end of it. She'd likely just keep coming back for more, knowing I was vulnerable. I never imagined that a casual first date could spiral into such a terrifying ordeal. When I swiped right on Rachel's profile, she seemed like an interesting woman with whom I could potentially connect. Her photos depicted an attractive, outgoing individual with a warm smile and a love for outdoor adventures. Our initial messages flowed smoothly, and we bonded over our shared passion for hiking and exploring new trails. With high hopes, I suggested meeting up for a casual dinner date at a cozy Italian restaurant in the city. Rachel enthusiastically agreed, and I found myself looking forward to our rendezvous, anticipating an evening of lively conversation and perhaps the spark of a budding connection. The evening itself started promisingly enough. Rachel arrived punctually, looking lovely in a simple sundress that accentuated her natural beauty. We exchanged pleasantries and settled into our table, perusing the menu while making small talk about our respective weeks. However, as the night progressed, it became increasingly apparent that the chemistry I had hoped for was lacking. Our conversation felt stilted, with awkward lulls punctuated by forced attempts at finding common ground. Rachel's responses were often curt or dismissive, and I found myself struggling to maintain an engaging dialogue. As the meal drew to a close, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that we were better suited as friends, if anything. Rachel seemed pleasant enough, but the romantic spark I had envisioned simply wasn't there. With a polite smile, I thanked her for her company and suggested we part ways, assuming that would be the end of our brief encounter. How wrong I was. Within a matter of days, Rachel began popping up everywhere I went. At first, it seemed like mere coincidences. I'd spot her at the coffee shop near my office, or catch a glimpse of her familiar figure at the gym I frequented. But then the sightings became more frequent, and an unsettling pattern began to emerge. My workplace soon became a regular haunt for her. She would linger outside the building, staring intently whenever I arrived or left. Sometimes she would approach me, asking if we could grab a drink or catch up, despite my repeated polite rejections. Her demeanor was always friendly, almost overly so, but there was an undercurrent of desperation that made me deeply uncomfortable. The phone calls and texts were incessant, bombarding me at all hours of the day and night. My phone would light up with messages from Rachel, ranging from friendly inquiries about my day to increasingly desperate pleas for another chance. When I didn't respond, the messages took on a darker tone, with veiled threats about ruining my reputation or making my life miserable if I continued to ignore her. It was unsettling, to say the least. I began to dread leaving my apartment, never knowing when or where Rachel might appear. Her obsession was escalating rapidly, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if she was watching me from the shadows, plotting her next move. The situation reached a boiling point when Rachel somehow obtained my home address. One chilly autumn night, I returned from work to find her sitting on my doorstep, eyes red from crying. Before I could even react, she launched into a tirade about how I had led her on and betrayed her trust, accusing me of emotional cruelty and callously toying with her feelings. I tried to reason with her, gently but firmly explaining that our date had been a one-time event and that I had no interest in pursuing anything further. But my words only seemed to inflame her further. She became hysterical, screaming that she would make me pay if I didn't give our relationship another chance, her threats growing increasingly unhinged. That was the breaking point. I knew I had to take action before things spiraled even further out of control. The next morning, I contacted the authorities and filed a restraining order against Rachel, documenting her erratic behavior and the threats she had made, both explicit and implied. Even with the legal protection in place, the fear lingered like a persistent shadow. Every unexpected noise or movement would set my heart racing, convinced that Rachel was lurking nearby, waiting to pounce. I had to change my routines, avoid familiar places, and remain constantly vigilant, never knowing when her obsession might resurface with a vengeance. Months passed, and slowly the incidents became less frequent. Rachel seemed to have gotten the message, or perhaps she had simply moved on to her next fixation, leaving me to pick up the tattered pieces of my once peaceful existence. But the experience left me shaken, painfully aware of how quickly a seemingly harmless encounter could devolve into a nightmarish ordeal. In retrospect, I should have heeded the red flags earlier, the persistent messages, the unwanted appearances, the refusal to accept rejection. But hindsight is always crystal clear, and in the moment, I assumed that Rachel's behavior, while unsettling, would eventually subside once she realized the futility of her pursuit. Even now, years later, I can't help but wonder what became of Rachel. Did she find someone else to fixate on, or did her obsessive tendencies eventually consume her entirely? The thought sends a chill down my spine, a reminder of how narrowly I escaped her suffocating grasp. And on those rare occasions when I catch a glimpse of a familiar figure in a crowded street or bustling cafe, my heart skips a beat, and I find myself scanning the face intently, half expecting to meet Rachel's piercing gaze once more. It's a lingering paranoia, a haunting remnant of that harrowing experience, a constant reminder to never let my guard down, lest I find myself ensnared in another's twisted obsession. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.